In this tutorial, I'll show you how to create a lightsaber effect using BCC Laser Beam in Avid Media Composer. Hey, here I am in Avid, and this is the end result, pre-rendered, laser beam or lightsaber effect coming from a Sith Lord who's menacingly pointing it at the camera. And yeah, I know, Sith Lords don't use blue lightsabers, but blue just looked better on this footage. So please don't complain about it, it bothers me too. Anyway, so I'm going to show you how to create this and do whatever color you want on this footage. So let's get started. So here's a new sequence, no effects. If you've never done a lightsaber effect before, keep in mind that you will have to rotoscope most of it. There might be some ways to shortcut some of the process, but ultimately you just have to kind of trace your footage no matter what app you're using. Anyway, so this is the default setting for BCC Laser Beam, and you can see if I enable them, some on-screen controls like position and target. And notice that target for the laser beam is not the same as the length. If I go into light source 1, twirl down, I see length down here at the bottom. So they're independent, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, it lets you do the trademark forming beam effect. And also, it means that if you animate position 1 and target 1, the length doesn't change, which means it's like a physical object, like it has a length, which can be useful in some situations. Alright, but enough technical stuff, let's get started with the process. So I'm going to go back up to the top here and click Composite on Source. So frame 1, make sure you're at the start of your timeline, and just position the source and target so that they line up with the middle of your beam. Go for the middle. Don't try to kind of anticipate, the edge. It just kind of makes it harder to work with. When you're zoomed in Avid, if you hold Alt Control, you can pan. A very useful tool to know about. So what I'm going to do is just kind of keyframe every 10 frames. It's a reasonable amount, and it'll get us pretty good results on this footage. So if I go into the light source, position 1, add keyframe, target XY, add keyframe. So that gives us X and Y keyframes for both target and position. Like I said, I'm just going to jump forward 10 frames and make sure it lines up on each one. So again, going for the center and the target, we don't see the endpoint. In this footage, it doesn't matter, so that kind of makes it easier. You just have to make sure it hits the edge of the screen where it should. And this is the process. It might make things easier for you if you actually bypass the beam, then you can see your source footage. But this is all I'm going to do for the next couple minutes, so I will fast forward that to the end product. And putting in the last keyframe now. Okay, so let's see how that looks. Again, every 10 frames, this footage has nice slow motion in it, so that works pretty well. And there's only actually one part where I don't like it, just about there. And at this point, anytime I move these crosshairs, it'll create a keyframe. So beware of that once you start this process, that it's kind of too late to go back. So like little parts like this where it moves a lot, you might have to make some fine tune adjustments. And like here, like if it falls behind a bit. But the nice thing about this method is that every 10 frames you're probably going to get a pretty good track. So even where it comes in from off screen, that looks good. Alright, so now let's turn the beam back on and see how this looks. Alright, lacks a little bit to be desired, but we'll fix it. We're going to increase the width of the beam and the length. So again, in light source 1, we have the end width and start width. We just need to make sure these are wide enough to cover the source footage. So let's go, 52, 55 maybe. It's a little safer for both. And that looks good. And another thing is the length. So the beam is always off screen in this shot, So the length just has to be long enough so that it's, the tip is never on screen. Okay, looks good. All right, now you notice how when it starts moving like that, it looks like it falls out of sync? Well, that could just be the motion blur. And we have a motion blur group here. So if I turn that on, see it widens a little bit. If I increase the shutter angle, I get more blur, and I can adjust the shutter phase, which moves where in the path the blur appears. And negative 360 works great for this footage. You can see now it actually hides the source beam almost perfectly. And there's a couple of points here, like here we can still see it a little bit. You can actually animate the shutter phase if you need to. I don't want to get bogged down with keyframes though. So I'm just actually going to fix the position of these a little bit at this point. And when you're making changes to keyframes, check where existing keyframes already are. You don't want to introduce any sudden jumps in the motion that way. That's pretty good. So generally you want to kind of go, if possible, like halfway between keyframes for doing like a global change. All right, but that looks good. It should be a little higher too. Okay, good. So we've got our track looking good. We have a motion blur that looks good. One other thing now, we can make the beam flicker. So that's again in the light source group. We call it light strobe. So when you turn on the strobe, the default's 100. That means the whole beam goes away. And we don't want the whole beam to go away. So turn the amount down to maybe like 30 or 40. And the speed 100 is good. That's a very fast flicker. And random 100 means there'll be a lot of time when it doesn't flicker. Random 0 means it's constantly flickering. And personally, I prefer a beam that flickers more often. I'll just turn it up maybe to like 40 or something so that it looks pretty flickery. All right, and it's hard to see that part as I scrub, but you'll see it in the rendered result. Okay, so we have our strobe set up. Now let's look at the color. So the way this filter works, it's additive. So if you have like a color 1 that doesn't have a lot of lightness value or a lot of brightness in it, you might not get a white beam. Same thing with the outside glow color. Like if you choose a darker color, you might not see it at all because, again, it's additive. So keep that in mind. And you can choose different colors here. Like I can make the center of the beam slightly blue, and then the outside of the beam, maybe just a brighter blue. And if that still doesn't give you a nice white glow, you can actually change the apply mode up here for the whole thing. And that is what we will be doing actually. A screen or an add apply mode definitely makes the beam brighter. And now we can see the color is actually a bit too intense. So let's go screen. That covers it pretty well. And we can also adjust the actual intensity here and down here. So there's lots of ways to get different colors in your beam. Again, your source footage makes a big difference here. Like I said, red doesn't look good on this one, even though he's a Sith Lord. Like if I try it, you can see, like, yeah, we can kind of see it, but it doesn't like stand out as much. It would help if I made this a bit yellow. Maybe that much even. Like, yeah, that's actually not too bad. So anyway, yeah, I'll actually leave it like that just to show you that you don't have to do blue. I did blue because it's like the most famous color, but yeah, this works pretty well. At this point, actually, we might want to take it down a bit. Another thing that you might run into is if your source footage has a very thick beam, like ours did, so if I bypass that, it might end up, with an even thicker lightsaber. So keep that in mind when you're shooting. You want a visible beam for reference point, but if it's too thick, you get like a really thick looking lightsaber. And you can bring down the end width, start width. You can animate these too, but at some point you're just gonna have to cover it all up. Okay, so undoing that, since I'm changing the end width here, let me fix one other thing. So as he tilts the beam towards us, the beam should be getting thicker at the end. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to animate the end width from there to about here. Add a keyframe, and there we go. So now it has a little bit more perspective on it. And he undoes the action around here. So create another keyframe, go forward a bit to about, let's say, there. Add another keyframe, and bring it back down to where it should be. Now, one other thing to keep in mind is that when you create keyframes for sliders, you have to create the keyframe first. On-screen controls are unique in Avid. You can just move them and get a new keyframe. Not so for sliders. So make sure you have the keyframe in place before you start changing things. Okay, it's looking pretty good. You know, I'm just going to experiment real quick. If I set this to add, what does that do? Oh, that looks good. Okay. All right, I take back what I said about add mode. It works great. And red can work too on this footage. You just have to really push it up. Another fun thing to add is smoke. So if I turn on the smoke here, okay, now wait, that's incredibly bright. Let me turn on the master intensity. There we go. So you can see you get a nice like misty glow around the beam. And you can adjust the density of that and the radius. So there's a lot of nice touches built into this filter, so you don't have to add a lot more to it. However, I want to keep that nice red intensity I had going here. So maybe I'll have to turn the smoke density way down and the radius way down. There we go. All right. Yeah, so that really makes it glow. We actually might not need add mode anymore. Let's see how screen looks. Yeah, that's pretty good. They're both good. I'm going to keep it on screen for now. Okay, so we have our Sith Lord, and he's menacing, and he has his lightsaber. The final touch we're going to add here is a lens flare for the base of the hilt. Now to do that, we're first going to bypass the effect, and we're going to Alt-drag Lens Flare 3D MT onto our footage. And the lens flare lets us use motion tracker. So yay, we don't have to do it by hand this time. But before we do that, let's find a preset that looks really good. And I'm just going to use the preset browser for that. So Lens Flare 3D has a ton of presets, and all of them look really cool depending on what you need. The one I like for this shot is this Cool Lens DD. It's pretty understated. I think it works well. And now we're going to go in and motion track. For this footage, I want to view the preprocessed source and adjust the input levels. That helps get a better track. And maybe blur it a bit too. Okay. So now we should be able to track it without issue now that we've increased the contrast and whatnot. So this is the area. I'm going to make that bigger too. And if anything does go wrong, we can always reposition the tracker, but let's see how it goes. And I'll fast forward this to spare you. Okay, so the track is done, and it looked like it did a pretty good job. Let's apply it to the light source and see. Okay, so it starts off perfect, and then it gets a little bit offset. Good news is we have a offset X and Y to correct for that kind of thing. So let me show the motion path again. I would say it's good until it comes back up around there. So let's actually create an offset X keyframe and fix it up to here. Okay, so you know, I said you don't have to do it manually, and you don't. You could have actually just gone back and retract it, maybe a little bit better, but in the interest of time, it's just faster to do what I did. All right, so it looks really good right at the source there. There are a few things we can do to make it pop even more. So let's add the elliptical caustic. I like that thing. And let's move the pivot point a little off to the side. And we're going to want the color to change a little bit to match the laser beam. So let's re-enable the laser beam. So now that we have a bright yellow-red beam, we're going to have to change the colors in our glow here. So let's go into the flare. I'm just going to eyedrop the color of the beam. Looks good. Same thing for the stripe that we have here. I love the stripe. Adds a lot. Let's increase the intensity of that stripe. Ah, it's so cool. Anyway, let's bring down the softness and the length. Yeah, there we go. Maybe even bring it down a little more. The caustic I'm going to keep actually blue. I think it adds a nice complement here. And one more thing, let's go into the polygons. Just make them a little bit more visible. Just a bit there. Okay, now the lens flare can also flicker like the laser beam. We have these two controls, shimmer and flicker. I'm going to turn them both up all the way. The shimmer affects the rays, and the light flicker affects everything. So I'm going to turn the amount all the way up and the speed pretty high. Another thing I want to do is actually take down the length of the rays. So rays, color from flare, yeah, definitely use that. And intensity, sure, but scale, no. There we go. All right, so we've got a new lightsaber now, a Sith lightsaber, all created in a few minutes in Avid. So we just created a lightsaber effect in Avid. Let's appreciate that. Anyway, so if you liked what you saw here and want to try it for yourself, you can download a trial version from our website and see more tutorials. And that's all at borisfx.com.